Okay. I have to share my screen. Here we go. Okay, I guess I should start by introducing myself and tell you what my conclusion is going to be. Oh, okay. I was 11 years old when I saw the first people walking on the moon. I guess that probably makes me the oldest person in this meeting, unless I'm wrong. However, I think this entitles me to call myself a grumpy old man who is and has always been a space enthusiast. And as a matter of fact, I will focus this talk on many different things, including what is happening today in spaceflight, what is likely to happen tomorrow, and how that becomes always mixed up with politics and culture and finance, other things, not to mention technology, of course. It's going to be a long road. However, at the end of this long road, we will have a very bright future among the stars. But we, I mean humanity, our descendants. And in fact, I am very much persuaded that space expanded into outer space is our cosmic destiny. And I'm very much persuaded of that. In matter of fact, I'm not very politically correct. I'm used to think with my own head and do things my way. Here we go. And that's the perspective from which I am giving you this talk. I have written a book. It's called Tales of the Turing Church. It's mainly about science and metaphysics. But there is one chapter dedicated to space. The chapter is called The Sacred Road to the Stars. Reading it from my book, I say that beginning to expand into space is the most important task of humanity at this moment in history. So yes, I'm very much a space fundamentalist. No, I'm not ignoring the fact that there are a lot of other important issues on the table for humanity at this moment. But yes, I'm still a space fundamentalist. And yes, I'm still persuaded that this is an extremely important thing that we have to do at this moment in history. Let's take a look at how things are developing in space, starting with the United States. The question is now what? A couple of years ago, we were told that the next man and the first woman will land on the moon in 2024. Nobody that I know ever thought this objective was realistic, but this was the objective declared by the outgoing US administration. This objective is not shared by the incoming US administration. And as a matter of fact, it is not very clear what the space policy of the Biden administration will be. Unfortunately, in the last few decades, at least, democratic administrations have not been very space friendly. Only in the last few decades, because in the 1960s, at the time where this beautiful picture was taken, it was mostly democratic presidents, JFK and Lyndon Johnson, were pushing for space exploration. Richard Nixon coming at the very last moment. However, things are not very clear. I do not know what is going to happen with the US space program. I don't think anything really catastrophic is going to happen in one sense or another. Things will be slowed down, there won't be a lot of money for lunar missions. It's likely to be more money for Earth observation and this kind of things. However, there is still a possibility that the US government will lead the next lunar adventures by the end of this decade. Now, of course, the US is not the world. And if we look at the moon right now, we see a Chinese flag. The Chinese flag was left there by the Chang'e 5 missions a couple of weeks ago. And a couple of days ago, part of these space missions has returned to Earth, bringing back samples of lunar soil. This is a little thing, perhaps, but some people think that the presence of a Chinese flag on the moon is a big thing. And as a matter of fact, China has announced a very ambitious lunar exploration and industrialization program. Now, if you look at this really excellent science fiction book by Kim Stanley Robinson called Red Moon, is set more or less at half of this century, 2050 or so, and it gives a rather credible picture of a China-dominated moon in the future. The Chinese have a lot of moon bases. Well, also the US, they have other moon bases, Europe is involved, but basically, essentially, the moon belongs to China. It's a very good book and I recommend it. Now, this is something that could happen. Doesn't have to happen, but could well happen. I think that a very credible threat of Chinese domination in cislunar space could be the only thing able to give a sense of hurry to the US administration. And I think this would be a good thing. However, the moon race is on. The participants are the United States, China, perhaps even Europe could play a role. Well, this is science fiction perhaps, but since I'm European, I like to mention it. But space is not something that uniquely belongs to governments. In fact, what is called Space 2.0, which is faster, cheaper, and more sustainable, is driven by the private sector. Now, I cannot overstate the importance of reusable launchers, which are the things that is driving down the cost of accessing space. Already many decades ago, Freeman Dyson and other experts said that, well, the cost of accessing space has to go down. And once it goes down enough, things will happen. Big things will happen. Now, thanks to SpaceX and other companies in the private sector, the costs of sending things to space have gone down by at least 1 order of magnitude with respect to a few decades ago. And they're still going down. Once we go below a critical cost, things like lunar bases and mining energy from space, even space tourism, even mission to Mars will become possible. This is the single most important factor, the cost of accessing space. Now, of course, also in the public sector, they are developing reusable launchers. I was just reading a couple of days ago that China is developing one. But here we go. Things are happening, and these things are good. Now, besides governments and besides large corporation, I like to think that also citizen space organization could play an important role. And I've been involved in many citizen space groups that want to do something in space. My experience is that things tend to become too confused at the beginning, and we tend to get lost in details. For example, there is a talk about crowdfunding, perhaps crowdsourcing, or a Kickstarter campaign, or funding space exploration with cryptocurrencies. These are all good things, but they are kind of details. We don't have to get lost in details too soon. We will come to designing how to do things in detail, but I believe we should start defining something that a citizen space organization should do in space, and it has to be something simple. When I talk about space enthusiasts who want to take a hands-on role, I usually say that we should start with one project. Should be a very simple project, simple to explain, shouldn't cost too much money, should be something that we can do with a reasonable amount of funding. For example, the amount of funding that could be realistically achieved with, for example, a cryptocurrency funding campaign. I would like very much to be a part of a simple project, very simple. You know, let's just put a CubeSat like this in orbit around the moon. And we will decide about new things to share at the right moment. But let's start and do one simple thing. This is my main recommendation. The road is long. In the 1960s, we thought that we would be living in cities on the moon and going to Mars very soon. That didn't happen. There are many reasons that can be recalled to explain why it didn't happen. However, I think the exactly the same thing is going to continue to happen. It's not a sprint, it's a slow hike. And we cannot speed it up that much. This beautiful screen comes, I think, from the Japanese mission that a couple of weeks ago brought back samples of an asteroid back to the Earth. So things are happening, especially in robotic exploration of space. Things are happening. Unfortunately, they are happening slowly, but this is how things go. Let's enjoy the slow hike to the stars. Let's enjoy it because it's something beautiful, and we're going to go one small step at a time. But the only way to keep motivation while we walk one small step after another is to have great expectations for what comes after the first small steps, and then putting great expectation in capitals, because this is really one of the key points that I want to make. When we start talking of expectations, what we think will happen, what we want to happen, we are entering the territory of popular culture, which is really the most important factor. Cultural engineering for great expectations is the way to rekindle the enthusiasm for space exploration that we had, for example, in the 60s, but I'm going to elaborate on that later. Science fiction is important. Good science fiction is important. Good science fiction able to stimulate and energize young people to become scientists and engineers and do great things is important. We are going beyond the old narratives of space that were popular in the 1960s. And there are important differences between the 1960s, the time of the Apollo missions, and today's world. For example, today people care much more about social justice and the environment. Let's take a look at these factors, beginning with the description of the space narrative of the 60s. I have seen it as a very young child. Perhaps I'm the only one in the audience. Oh, also Robin is here. Robin is old enough to have. Robin is old enough to remember these things. For those too young to remember, I recommend a very good book by Norman Mailer, one of the greatest writers, greatest American writers of the 20th century, called Of a Fire on the Moon. Is the story of the Apollo 11 mission, but Mailer also gives a very interesting portrait of all the societal and political factors that made the Apollo program possible. There is another book that gives the spirit of that age. It's the book called by Tom Wolfe called The Right Stuff. What is the right stuff? The right stuff refers to the kind of people who were the first astronauts. Most of them were fighter pilots by training. All of them were white. All of them were men. The right stuff refers to personality traits like courage, self-reliance, determination, strength of will, all these characteristics of, between brackets, strong people. Now, the point that I want to make here is that now we have much more diversity in space flight, and this is good, but this does not mean that the right stuff is a bad thing. The fact that we have also other values now does not mean that the values upon which the space exploration of the past decades was built was bad. This is still good. The right stuff is not the only good thing, but it's one of the good things that constitute an important asset of humanity at this point. I do recommend these two books, especially the one by Norman Mailer, and especially to those too young to have experienced the Apollo years in first person. Now, I would like to know what has happened to this slide, which was not meant to be displayed like that. So I'm just moving to the next one, and I'm going to describe the point that I wanted to make in the previous one. Now we know that we must protect the environment of the Earth, and that this is an incredibly important thing. It's one of the most important priorities for us at this moment. We must do this, but we should not think that taking care of the Earth is something in conflict with exploring space. On the contrary, the two things can proceed together, and a case can be made that is only by offshoring heavy industry to outer space that we can protect the Earth without compromising our growing energy needs. This is a point made by Jeff Bezos, I believe, a couple of years ago on the occasion of the announcement of the Blue Moon lunar lander. Say that, okay, our energy needs are going to continue to grow. We have to face that as a fact. And the only way to ensure a more and more abundant supply of energy without destroying the ecosystems and biosystems on our planet is to offshoring all these things to outer space. This is a long-term project, of course, but it's something that we should do, and is, I believe, one of the best justification for an ambitious space program at this moment. Continuing with the difference between our days and the 1960s, let me just mention the importance of social justice, which is very much affirmed today. It was not the case in the 1960s. In fact, we remember this poem by Scott Heron called The Whiting on the Moon, which condemned the fact that Black people didn't seem to have a place in space. In passing, I want to remind you that contrary to what we tend to think today, not everyone was in favor of space exploration in the 60s. In fact, I believe that Martin Luther King himself led marches to protest the fact that so much money was spent in space that could have been used to do good things here on the Earth. Also here, I think the two things don't have to be in conflict with each other. Coming back to the fact that space was not for Black people in the 60s. Now things are different. And looking at this picture of the last bunch of astronauts in the International Space Station makes this point. Now, when I look at this picture, I don't really see men and women. I don't really see Americans and non-Americans. I don't really see white people and Black people. I only see humans who are living in space. And this is something very beautiful to see. So I don't focus very much on these things, but I understand that many people do. And from their point of view, I think things are developing in the right direction. Let's talk science fiction. I think everyone knows that season 5 of The Expanse is being streamed on Amazon now. This is one of the very few science fiction shows that I like. Perhaps it's the only one. I used to think that when they adapt science fiction for film and for TV, they usually make a very bad job. But The Expanse is good. It's very realistic, it's well done with attention to detail, does not deviate from The Expanse novels too much. It's quite faithful. It shows a credible picture of a future interplanetary society. It's a great space opera, but also adapted to the culture of our times. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, I noticed this tweet by James Corey, who is the author of the Expanse novels. Well, as a matter of fact, James Corey is a name for a group of 2 different authors. And he said, "Oh, just read a tweet where someone is worried that The Expanse is going to get woke. Dude, we have been woke as fuck since day one." That is actually true. Think, for example, that Naomi Nagata in this picture is a Black woman coming from what in The Expanse plays the role of a third world country. What else? Jim Holden comes from a group family with many different people living together, and considers that he has many dads and many moms. The person who is probably the nicest one in the show, she appears in season 3, is a woman who is also a priest and is married to a woman. So a lot of these, between brackets, woke things that we see in today's cultures are reflected in The Expanse. And some people complain about that. They think that this is something that goes against the more traditional views of space expansion. But you know, from my point of view, is enough that The Expanse is great. If living in the interplanetary future shown in The Expanse means being woke, then I'm woke myself, even if I'm one of those who often complain about some excesses of contemporary woke culture. Let's continue with our great expectation. Somehow, someone will go back to the moon sustainably and permanently. Maybe the US government, maybe Chinese government, maybe Elon Musk, maybe something else, but someday, not next year, not in 2024, perhaps by the end of the decade, perhaps later. Doesn't matter. I'd like to be still alive when I see the next people walking on the moon. But it's not really a requirement. I'm happy enough thinking that things are moving in that direction. And I would be very happy if I could spend the time doing something to help things moving faster in that direction. Speed is not an issue. The outcome is an issue. After the moon, this is a beautiful picture. We see our next 3 destinations in space. We see the moon, Mars, and Venus. I have great expectation for future interplanetary humanity. It's going to be as fun as The Expanse. It's going to be more fun than The Expanse. Too bad I won't see our interplanetary future myself, but I feel happy for the future generations that will see it. And what comes after that? We have even greater expectations to take the humanity around the stars. And I like to say, yes, we can. Some people say that we cannot go to the stars. They mentioned the huge engineering challenge of interstellar missions. They mentioned fundamental physics, speed of light limit. I say bullshit. Why do I say bullshit? Because we just don't know what human ingenuity will achieve tomorrow. If there are engineering challenges, we will overcome them. And perhaps we will also be able to do something about that speed of light thing. I'm not saying that it will happen, I'm saying that it could happen. And when it comes to far future generations, I have great unlimited expectations for the ultimate achievements of our descendants among the galaxies. I'm not going to elaborate too much on that in this presentation, but this is the main content of my book. And if you go to my website, turingchurch.net, you can find out everything about my book. I would be happy, of course, if you decide to buy it. But if you don't, there is also a free online version for you to enjoy. And if you do so, I would like very much to hear your opinion. And I think that my time is over now. so that I'll just stop here. Which window am I in?
Yes, thank you so much.
Hold on, I think I have lost my Zoom window. Okay, I want to. For some reason, my screen is all messed up. Huh? Okay, here we go. Okay, that's, I think this is exactly the time where I was supposed to end. And I don't know, do you have time for questions now? Or maybe later, I will also be in the space panel.
I'm not seeing any questions in the chat right now, so maybe you want to return to the chat and other people can ask questions there if they have any. And then we can move on to the panel discussion right now.
That's great. So I will log off Zoom and come back to Astros. Yes. Thank you very much for